For 33 years, I was the family charity case, the outsider my parents generously tolerated but never quite claimed. I grew up apologizing for taking up space in a house that always felt like a museum I was lucky to visit. But the dynamic shifted the day I learned their comfortable life was funded by a 25-year-old secret. They had spent decades acting like my saviors, when in reality, they were spending my inheritance. The chandeliers in the ballroom of the Oakmont Country Club were designed to look like frozen waterfalls, cascading crystals that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was the sort of excessive, heavy beauty my parents loved, the kind that announced the price tag before you even stepped into the room. I stood near the periphery of the Persian runner, clutching a flute of sparkling water, watching my mother navigate the crowd. She moved with the grace of a predatory bird, her silk gown rustling softly as she accepted compliments on 40 years of marriage. I was 33 years old. Yet in this room, I felt 7. I felt like the child who had been allowed to come downstairs for dessert, but was expected to disappear before the real conversation started. My father was holding court near the bar, one hand resting on the shoulder of my cousin, Julian. Julian was tall, charismatic, and wore his tailored suit with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. He was the son of my father's brother, but looking at them, you would have thought he was the direct line, the heir apparent. "Come say hello." "Madeline," my mother called out, waving me over. Her voice was light, airy, and carried a subtle command that tightened the muscles in my neck. I walked over, forcing a smile that felt pasted on. "This is the Simmons girl we managed to keep in the state," a man I didn't recognize said, grinning. My father chuckled, clinking his Scotch glass against the man's tumbler. "Well, we do what we can. Madeline is doing her thing in the city. She works for that consulting group, very independent." He made independent sound like a hobby, something cute I did to pass the time. "And Julian here," my father continued, pivoting the conversation seamlessly, "just closed the acquisition on the Miller property. He represents the family with such tenacity. We are very proud." The distinction was subtle, painted in the faintest shades of language. I was doing my thing. Julian was representing the family. I was the erratic variable. He was the constant. I stood there, nodding, taking small sips of water, waiting for the permission to fade back into the wallpaper. It was the narrative I had lived with my entire life. I was the child they had taken in, the daughter who should be grateful, the one who was loved, but never quite owned. By the time the valet brought their car around at the end of the night, my jaw ached from clenching it. The silence inside their luxury sedan was hermetically sealed, shutting out the humid suburban night. My father drove, his hands resting lightly on the leather wheel. My mother adjusted the diamonds at her throat, humming a melody from the band's set list. "We need to discuss a small matter of business," my father said, his voice dropping into that serious, velvety register he used when he wanted something. I looked out the window at the passing street lamps. "On a Saturday night?" "It is about the lakeside property," my mother said, turning in her seat to look at me. The leather creaked under her shifting weight. "We are restructuring the financing. Just a smart tax move. We want to put your name on the refinancing package as a co-signatory." I frowned. "Why? I have no ownership stake in Lakeside. That belongs to the family LLC." "Exactly," my father said. "It is a gesture, a way to fold you in. Since you are not technically entitled the way others are, like Julian, we thought this would be a good responsibility test, a proof of loyalty, if you will." The phrasing made my stomach turn. Not technically entitled. I shifted, turning away from the window. "You want me to take on legal liability for a multi-million-dollar loan on a property I don't own, to prove I am loyal? It is not liability. Madeline," my mother said, her voice sharpening, "it is family synergy. We are offering you a chance to be part of the infrastructure. You always complain about feeling excluded." "I don't complain," I said. "I just notice." "Well, this is your chance to step up," my father said. "The papers are on the desk in the study. We can sign them when we get to the house. I took a breath. I had spent 3 decades saying yes. I had agreed to the boarding school they chose, the university major they suggested, the apartment they found for me. I had curated my entire existence to minimize friction, hoping that one day the friction would disappear and I would just be their daughter. But looking at the back of my father's head, at the stiff collar of his tuxedo shirt, I realized the friction was the point. The friction was how they knew they had traction. I can't do that. Dad, I said. The car did not slow down, but the air inside it seemed to freeze. Excuse me? My mother asked. I am not comfortable co-signing a loan for a property I have no equity in, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hands were shaking in my lap. It is a bad financial decision. My father laughed. A short, barking sound. A bad financial decision? You are lecturing me on finance? We pay for your car insurance. Madeline, we cover your phone plan. We have provided a safety net for you that most people would kill for. I appreciate that, I said, but this is different. It is not different, my mother snapped. It is gratitude. And if you cannot show a basic level of trust in us, perhaps we need to reevaluate how much we are supporting you. Is that an ultimatum? I asked. It is reality. My father said, apologize and sign the papers. Or we assume you are ready to be fully independent, and I mean fully. I looked at the passing houses, dark and silent. I did not apologize. The following Tuesday, I stood in the checkout line of a grocery store in the city, a basket of kale, chicken, and sparkling water heavy in my hand. I inserted my card into the reader, the platinum card my parents had given me when I graduated college. They had called it the emergency line, but over the years, they had insisted I use it for groceries and gas, claiming it helped them maximize points and kept my credit score high. It was another tether, another golden thread tying me to them. Declined? The cashier said, popping her gum. I frowned. That's not right. Try it again. She sighed and jammed the chip back in. Declined. Do you have another form of payment? I felt the heat climb up my neck. People were shifting behind me, impatient sighs rippling through the line. I pulled out my own debit card, the one linked to my salary, and paid. When I got to my car, I checked the banking app. The account associated with the platinum card wasn't just over the limit. I had been removed as an authorized user. There was no notification, no text message, no email, just a silent, digital excision. It wasn't about the money. I could afford my groceries. It was the pettiness of it. It was a reminder that my access to their world was a faucet they could turn off the moment I stopped dancing to their tune. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the grocery bags wilting in the passenger seat, and stared at the steering wheel. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a subscription service they had decided to cancel. The next day at work, the fluorescent lights of the consulting firm felt particularly harsh. I sat in the break room with Sarah, a senior analyst who had become my anchor in the corporate storm. She was 10 years older than me, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I envied. I told her everything, the dinner, the loan, the card. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl. Madeline, this isn't normal, she said. I know it's dysfunctional, I said, picking at the hem of my sleeve, but that's just how they are. They're intense. No, Sarah said, I don't mean it's just toxic. I mean it's strategic. She put the spoon down. Look at the pattern. They give you just enough to keep you dependent, but never enough to give you power. They praise the cousin who represents the family, but treat you like a charity case, and the moment you show a spine, they cut the financial legs out from under you. That's not parenting. That's containment. Containment? I asked. She nodded. They are managing you. The question is, why? Why do they need you to be the weak one? I don't know, I whispered. You need to document this, Sarah said, and you need to check your own records. If they're willing to use financial instruments to manipulate you, you need to know exactly what your legal standing is. Do you have your birth certificate? Your social security card? The originals? I think so. I said, They keep the originals in the safe at the house. I have copies. Get your own originals, Sarah said. Start building your own paper trail. Her words stuck with me. On Friday, I took a half day and went to the county registrar's office. It was a grim beige building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. I filled out the forms, paid the fee, and waited on a hard plastic chair until a clerk handed me a certified envelope. I opened it in the car. The birth certificate looked standard at first glance. Madeline Elizabeth Simmons, date of birth, June 12, 1990, parents' names listed correctly, but as I stared at it, small details began to itch at the back of my brain. The hospital listed was St. Mary's of the Valley. I knew that name. It had been a small private hospital, demolished when I was in high school to make way for condos. But the address listed under the hospital name wasn't where St. Mary's had been. It was 2 towns over, at an address that I was fairly certain had been a post office sorting facility in the 90s. I looked at the doctor's signature. Dr. A. J. Halloway. The ink looked stamped, not signed, a perfect, uniform loop that didn't show the variation of pressure a human hand would create. I flipped the document over. The filing date was listed as June 14th, 2 days after my birth. That was normal. But the stamp from the county clerk at the bottom, the one validating the record, was from a clerk named distinctively Thomas P. O'Malley. I pulled out my phone and searched for Thomas P. O'Malley County Clerk. An obituary popped up. Thomas O'Malley had died in 1988, 2 years before I was born. My heart did a strange, syncopated flutter in my chest. It didn't prove anything. I told myself, it could be a clerical error. A legacy stamp they hadn't replaced. A different Thomas O'Malley. But it felt wrong. It felt like a stage prop that looks convincing from the audience but reveals its cardboard edges when you hold it in your hand. I drove home with the radio off, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like an unexploded ordnance. 3 days later, the letter arrived. It was mixed in with a stack of junk mail and bills. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a return address that simply said Archive Services, LLC, and a PIO box in the city. I opened it at my kitchen counter, using a dull butter knife. Dear Ms. Simmons, we are contacting you regarding an inactive fiduciary matter that has recently come to our attention during an audit of closed firm records from the records from involuntarily dissolved entities. Our records indicate you are the named beneficiary of the Meridian Trust. Established April 4, 2001, this file has been flagged for a lack of verified beneficiary contact for a period exceeding 5 years. Please contact our Archives Division to verify your identity. I read it twice. 2001. I would have been 11 years old. I almost threw it away. It had all the hallmarks of a sophisticated scam, a vague trust, a request for identity verification. But the name of the trust, Meridian, paused my hand. Meridian was the name of the street my parents had lived on when they were first married, before they made their money, before the big house and the country club. They never talked about the Meridian house. They acted like their life had started in the mansion. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. Archive Services. A man's voice answered, gruff, distracted. Hi, I said. I received a letter about a Meridian Trust. My name is Madeline Simmons. One moment, I heard the clacking of a keyboard, then the rustle of paper. Ms. Simmons, we have been trying to locate a current address for you. We have a file here transferred from the dissolved firm of Callaway Associates. I don't know who that is. I said, they were estate planners. The man said, look, I need to verify I'm speaking to the right individual. Can you confirm your date of birth? I gave it to him. Can you confirm the name of your childhood pet? I paused. A scammer could find my birthday. But a pet? I had a dog when I was 6. A golden retriever named Buster. Buster, I said. The man on the phone hummed. That matches the security questions set up by the grantor. One more. What was the nickname used for you within the household? I froze. I hadn't used my childhood nickname in 20 years. It was something my grandmother had called me, and my parents had used it only until I was about 10. Before they decided it was too childish. "Little bird," I whispered. There was a pause. "Correct." The air left my lungs. "Ms. Simmons," the man said, his voice shifting, becoming less bureaucratic and more serious. "I am not the attorney on record. I am just handling the archives. But there are documents here that need your eyes. You are listed as the sole beneficiary of a trust that has been active for 25 years. 25 years? I asked. But the letter said established in 2001. The trust instrument was finalized then, he said. But the funding mechanism dates back further. Look, I can't discuss this over the phone. Can you come to our office? We are on 4th and Vine. I'll be there tomorrow, I said. The office of Graham Lyle was not in a glass skyscraper. It was in a 3-story brick walk-up in a part of the city that was gentrifying but not quite there yet. The lobby smelled of old paper and lemon-scented floor cleaner. Graham Lyle was a man in his 60s, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his eyes. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a librarian who had seen too much. "Madeline Simmons," he said, gesturing to a wooden chair. He had a file open on his desk, a physical file, thick with yellowing paper. "Mr. Lyle," I said, "I don't understand. My parents have never mentioned a trust." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "The trust wasn't established by your parents." "Ms. Simmons?" I blinked. "Then who established it?" "The grantor's name is redacted in the copy I have here," he said, tapping a document. "That happens sometimes with closed files where anonymity was a condition. But here is what I know. The trust was set up to provide for your education, housing, and general welfare." He turned a page. "However," he said, his voice dropping, "there are irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The annual statements," he said. "They stopped coming to the firm about 7 years ago. Before that, there were substantial withdrawals, but the justification codes are messy." "Messy how?" He pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a photocopy of a ledger. "Look here," he said, pointing with a pen. "Disbursement for educational expenses, $50,000. Date, August 2008. I looked at the date. I was 18 then. I went to a state university. My tuition was $12,000 a year. And here," he continued, "housing allowance, disbursed to a management company called Vantage Properties. Do you know them?" "No," I said. "Mr. Lyle leaned back. "Miss Simmons, the chain of authority on this trust is broken. The original trustee died. The successor trustee, the person currently in charge of the money, is listed here." He pointed to a name at the bottom of the page. "Robert Simmons. My father." I stared at the signature. It was his. The flamboyant, looping R, the sharp S. "Your father is the trustee?" Lyle asked. I nodded, my throat tight. "And he has never discussed this with you? Never provided a K-1 tax form? Never disbursed funds directly to you?" "Never." I said, "Graham Lyle closed the folder. Then we have a problem, because according to this, the trust currently holds, or should hold, assets in the mid-7 figures. But looking at these withdrawal patterns..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I walked out of his office into the bright afternoon sun, feeling like the pavement was tilting under my feet. Mid-7 figures, millions. My parents had made me beg for gas money in college. They had made me co-sign loans I didn't understand. They had cut off my credit card because I wouldn't take on their debt. And all the while, my father had been sitting on a pile of money that had my name on it. I drove straight to their house. It was a sprawling colonial with white pillars and manicured hedges. I parked in the circular driveway and let myself in with my key. They were in the sunroom at the back of the house. My mother was reading a magazine, and my father was on his iPad, checking stocks. The domesticity of the scene made me want to scream. "Madeline?" my mother said, looking up, surprised. "We didn't expect you. Did you come to sign the papers?" I stood in the doorway, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Is there a trust?" I asked. The silence that followed was shorter than a heartbeat. But I saw it. I saw the way my mother's facial muscles tightened, a microscopic flinch around the eyes. I saw my father's finger pause over the glass screen of his tablet. Then, the mask slid back into place. My mother laughed. It was a bright, tinkling sound, like ice hitting glass. A trust? Darling, what are you talking about? You have always had such a vivid imagination. She looked at my father, inviting him to join the joke. My father didn't laugh. He slowly lowered the iPad to his lap. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. It wasn't confusion I saw there. It was calculation. He was assessing me, the way a chess player assesses a pawn that has suddenly moved 2 squares instead of 1. "Where did you hear that?" he asked softly. "I received a letter," I said, "from an archive service, about the Meridian Trust." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Scams? Madeline, honest to God, you are so gullible. People buy lists of names and send out those letters hoping to catch someone foolish." "Is my name on a trust?" "Dad?" I asked. Ignoring her, he held my gaze. "There are many financial vehicles we use for estate planning. Madeline, you don't understand the complexities of tax law. If there is anything with your name on it, it is for your protection, to be managed by people who know what they are doing. So it exists," I said. He stood up, his height suddenly imposing. "You are upset about the credit card. I get it, but do not come into this house and interrogate me about my finances. Not your finances," I said, "mine." My mother stood up too, moving to his side. She reached out to touch his arm, a gesture of solidarity. "Madeline, you are sounding unhinged. Maybe you need to go home and rest. You've been working too hard." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, a vivid imagination, gullible, unhinged. They were words they had used on me since I was a child, bricks they had used to build the wall that kept me out. I looked at them, the couple who had raised me, the people I had spent my life trying to please, and for the first time, I didn't see parents. I saw 2 people guarding a vault. "I'm not unhinged," I said quietly. "And I'm not signing the refinance papers." I turned and walked out. As I reached the front door, I heard my mother's voice, low and urgent, drifting from the sunroom. "She knows," she whispered. "She doesn't know anything," my father replied. "She's bluffing." I closed the heavy front door behind me, the latch clicking shut with a sound like a gunshot. I walked to my car, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, clarifying rage. I wasn't bluffing, and I was going to prove it. Elise Marrow did not work in a warm, paper-scented office like Graham Lyle. Her firm occupied the 34th floor of a steel and glass tower downtown, the kind of place where the air conditioning hummed with a silence that felt expensive. Elise herself was a study in sharp angles, bobbed hair the color of pewter, a tailored suit that cost more than my car, and eyes that assessed you like an appraiser looking for cracks in a porcelain vase. She sat across from me at a glass conference table, her hands folded over the file I had brought from the archives. She had spent the last 20 minutes reading in silence, flipping pages with a rhythmic snap that echoed in the room. Finally, she looked up. "You need to understand the landscape before we start walking." "Madeline," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of the soothing cadence attorneys usually used for grieving clients. "In estate litigation, we do not deal in fairness, we deal in documentation, but the emotional component is what usually sinks the ship." "How do you mean?" I asked. "Families fight hardest when money is tied to identity," she said. "If this trust is what you suspect it is, your parents have not just stolen money. They have stolen a narrative. They have built their lives, their social standing, and their self-image on resources that belong to you. When we threaten that, we are not just asking for a refund, we are telling them their entire life is a fraud. They will not react with logic. They will react with survival instincts." I thought about the look on my father's face in the sunroom, the calculation, the threat wrapped in calm. "I am ready for that." I said. "Are you?" Elise challenged. Because the goal right now is not to confront, it is to collect. If you scream at them, they shred documents. If you demand answers, they move assets. We need to be archaeologists before we can be soldiers. We dig, we brush off the dirt, we catalog, and when we have the entire skeleton, then we invite them to the museum. She opened the file again. I have obtained a formal copy of the trust instrument from the Archives Service, she said. Graham Lyle gave you the summary, but the devil is in the definitions. She slid a thick document across the table. It was bound in blue paper, the edges yellowed with age. The Meridian Trust, she read, established 25 years ago. The grantor, the person who put up the money, was a woman named Eleanor Vance. I stared at the name. Eleanor Vance. I rolled it around in my mind, trying to attach a face to it. Nothing came up. No memory of a great aunt, a family friend, a neighbor. Who is she? I asked. We are looking into it, Elise said, but she was not a Simmons, and she was not related to your mother's side. The Carters. She was a third party, and she left a letter of wishes attached to the trust. Elise turned to a page near the back. A letter of wishes is not legally binding in the same way the trust statutes are, but it speaks to intent. Listen to this. She began to read, her finger tracing the line. It is my primary desire that the beneficiary be protected not only from financial want, but from pressure, coercion, and reputational manipulation. The funds are intended to provide independence, so that the child may know her worth is inherent, not conditional. I felt a lump form in my throat. Hard and painful. Reputational manipulation. It was such a specific phrase. It was as if this stranger, this Eleanor Vance, had looked into a crystal ball 25 years ago and seen exactly what my life would become. They did the exact opposite, I whispered. They made my worth entirely conditional. Elise nodded slowly. Which is why the trustee history is so damning. She flipped back to the front of the document. The trust originally named 2 co-trustees, she explained. One was a partner at the law firm that drafted this. A Mr. Henderson. He died 12 years ago. The other was a corporate fiduciary, a bank representative. They resigned 15 years ago. Why? I asked. Likely because the account became too difficult to manage, or there was conflict, Elise said. But here is where it gets interesting. Upon the resignation of the corporate trustee, a successor trustee was appointed. She pointed to the signature block I had seen in Graham's office. Robert Simmons. Your father appointed himself, Elise said. Can he do that? Technically, the trust allows for the family to nominate a successor if the professional trustees step down, she said. But look at the instrument of appointment. She produced another sheet of paper, a photocopy of the document that gave my father legal control over the money. It looks valid at first glance, she said. Signatures, dates, notary stamp. But look at the witness list. I looked. 2 names were scrawled there. Sarah Miller and David P. Jones. Now look at the notary imprint, Elise said. She pulled out a magnifying glass and held it over the stamp. The commission expiration date for the notary is 3 years after the document was signed. That is standard. But we ran a check on the notary's logbook, which is public record if you know where to look. On the date this document was supposedly signed, October 14th, 2010, this notary was on maternity leave. Her logbook is blank for that entire month. I looked up at her. So it's fake? It is assembled, Elise corrected. That is the term we use. It means they took a signature page from another document, or they backdated a new one and found a friendly notary to stamp it later without recording it. It is sloppy. It suggests arrogance. It suggests they never thought anyone would audit the chain of authority. What about the money? I asked. How much is left? Elise sighed. Removing her reading glasses, that is the harder question. We have reconstructed the asset list from the original schedule. 25 years ago, the Meridian Trust held a diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks, a stake in a small commercial property downtown, the old textile building on 4th Street, and a long-term whole-life insurance product. She paused. Based on market performance, if that money had just sat there, compounding, It should be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million. The number hung in the air. $4 million. My parents had refused to help me with a down payment on my first apartment because they said it would build character to rent. They had let me drive a car with no air conditioning for 5 years because they said they were cash poor at the moment. And the current value? I asked. Elise slid a single sheet of paper across the table. $212,000. I stared at the number. It wasn't just a loss. It was a gutting. Where did it go? I asked, my voice trembling. The statements from the last few years show vague line items. Elise said, family support advances, administrative restructuring fees, consulting retainers. They have been bleeding it dry. Madeline, slowly, steadily, and under the guise of management. I closed my eyes. The anger I had felt in the car was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. It wasn't just greed. It was a systematic dismantling of my future. I want to talk to the bank, I said, the one holding the funds now. We can try, Elise said. But be prepared. Your father is the trustee. To them, you are just a stranger asking about a locked vault. The meeting with the trust officer at First City Bank was an exercise in frustration. The officer, a man named Mr. Alderman, sat behind a mahogany desk that seemed designed to enforce distance. He was polite, his suit was impeccable, and his refusal to help was absolute. Ms. Simmons, I understand your concern, Mr. Alderman said, folding his hands. But as I explained to your attorney, the trustee of record has restricted disclosure on this account. I am the beneficiary. I said, leaning forward, it is my money, legally. The assets belong to the trust, he said smoothly. The beneficiary has rights to distribution, but the trustee has the right to management. And Mr. Simmons has been very specific that all inquiries must go through him, he cited. Emotional fragility on your part. My hands clenched in my lap. Emotional fragility. It was the same narrative they used everywhere. Mr. Alderman, I said, I have reason to believe the funds are being misappropriated. That is a serious accusation, he said, his face tightening, and one you would need a court order to substantiate. We follow the instructions of the authorized party, Elise interjected smoothly. We are not asking you to violate privacy laws. Mr. Alderman, we are asking for clarification on a specific disbursement code appearing on the archive's summary. Code 402, Educational Reimbursement. Mr. Alderman hesitated. He looked at his screen, then back at us. That code is standard, he said. It covers tuition, books, and board for approved institutions. And which institution was approved? Elise asked. Mr. Alderman glanced at the screen again. It was a reflex, a momentary lapse in his guard. The payments have been consistent to St. Jude's Academy for the last 4 years, he said. The room went silent. St. Jude's Academy. I had gone to public high school. I had gone to a state college. But my cousin Julian, the one who represented the family, the one my parents adored, he had gone to St. Jude's, his younger sister, Clara. Was there now? Mr. Alderman seemed to realize he had said too much. He cleared his throat and shut the folder on his screen. As I said, I cannot discuss specific amounts. We thanked him and left. In the elevator, I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door. They paid for Julian. I said, they used my trust fund to pay for Julian's private school tuition while telling me they couldn't afford to send me to summer camp. It proves the theft, Elise said, her voice grim. But it also proves the motive. They weren't just taking the money to buy cars. They were using it to build the family dynasty they wanted, investing in the children they preferred. I felt a wave of nausea. It was so much worse than simple greed. Greed I could understand. But this was a value judgment. They had looked at me, and they had looked at Julian, and they had decided that he was the investment, and I was the resource to be mined. Be practical. Madeline, that's what my mother always said. Be practical. We don't have the budget for that. They had the budget. They just didn't have the desire. We need to go deeper, Elise said when we got back to the lobby. The tuition is just the tip of the iceberg. I am bringing in a specialist. The specialist was Victor Hale. Victor was a forensic accountant who looked more like a weary homicide detective than a math whiz. He wore a rumpled blazer and had dark circles under his eyes, as if he spent his nights chasing numbers through dark alleyways. We met in a small conference room at Elise's firm 2 days later. Victor didn't waste time with pleasantries. He taped a large piece of butcher paper to the glass wall and started drawing circles. Rich people don't steal money by stuffing it in a mattress, Victor said, uncapping a marker. They steal it by moving it. They create layers. He drew a circle in the center. This is the trust, he said. Now, if your father just wrote a check to himself, that's taxable and obvious, so he doesn't do that. Instead, he creates entities. He drew 3 smaller circles around the big one. LLC, number 1, a family foundation, a consulting firm. He pointed to the first circle. The trust pays the LLC for property management. The LLC pays the consulting firm for advisory services. The consulting firm pays your father a salary. By the time the money hits his bank account, it looks like earned income. It's clean. He looked at me. We need to find the entities. Madeline. Specifically, we need to look for social clubs. Social clubs? I asked. Victor nodded. It's a classic move. Private clubs often have associated foundations or charities. You donate to the club's charity using trust funds. Tax deductible. Looks benevolent. The club then hires your consulting firm to handle the event. The money circles back to you, minus a fee for the club. It buys you status and launders the cash at the same time. Does your family belong to any private associations? I felt a chill. The Highland Club. I said. Victor capped the marker. The Highland Club. Exclusive? Very. I said, my parents have been members for 20 years. They practically live there. My father's on the finance committee. Victor looked at Elise. Bingo. If he's on the finance committee, he controls the flow. He can approve the invoices that pay his own shell companies. I need to see it. I said, you can't just walk into their books. Victor said, absolutely not. I need to see them. At the club. A week later, the Highland Club was hosting its annual summer gala. My parents would be there. They were always there, holding court at the center table. I wasn't a member, but my colleague, James, was. His father had been a founder. I asked him to take me as his guest. He was hesitant. He knew my family situation was tense, but I told him I just wanted to make peace. To show face, I wore a dress I had bought with my own money, a midnight blue silk that fit like armor. I pulled my hair back tight. I wasn't going there to beg. I was going there to observe. The Highland Club was a fortress of old money. High ceilings, oak paneling, the smell of lilies and expensive perfume. The gala was in full swing when we arrived. A string quartet played in the corner, struggling to be heard over the roar of conversation. I spotted my parents immediately. They were near the terrace doors. My mother looked radiant in emerald green, laughing at something a woman next to her had said. My father was nodding, a glass of wine in his hand, looking like the benevolent patriarch he pretended to be. I moved closer, weaving through the crowd, keeping large floral arrangements between us. I wanted to hear them before they saw me. I drifted toward a pillar near their group. The noise of the party was loud, but my mother's voice had a piercing quality that cut through the din. So relieved it's finally settled. She was saying to the woman next to her, Mrs. Sterling, the club president's wife. The refinancing went through without a hitch. And Madeline? Mrs. Sterling asked, is she on board? My mother laughed. It was a sound I knew well, dismissive, light. Oh, you know Madeline. She lives in her own world. We didn't even bother her with the details. We just handled it. We did the hard part years ago. She'll never challenge it. She doesn't have the stomach for conflict. The women laughed together. She thinks she's so independent, my mother added, sipping her champagne. But she's still the little girl we took in. She'd be lost without us managing the messy parts of life. The air left my lungs, the little girl we took in. They weren't just hiding the money. They were broadcasting my incompetence. They were building a social consensus that I was weak, fragile, a charity case that needed managing. She'll never challenge it wasn't a prediction. It was a strategy. They had groomed me to be compliant so they could rob me blind. I stepped out from behind the pillar. "Hello, Mother," I said. The laughter cut off instantly. Mrs. Sterling's smile froze. My mother turned, and for a second, the blood drained from her face. Her eyes darted to my father, who had just turned around. "Madeline," she stammered, recovering quickly. "We didn't know you were coming," I smiled. It was a cold, sharp thing. "I'm here with a friend." I said, "I heard you talking." My mother stiffened. "We were just saying how proud we are of your independence. Not this time. You were saying you did the hard part. I'm curious. What was the hard part? Forging the signatures? Or spending the money?" The silence that followed was small, contained to our little circle, but it felt deafening. My father stepped forward, his hand gripping my elbow hard. "You are making a scene," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You have had too much to drink." "I haven't had a drop," I said, pulling my arm away. "And I'm not the one who should be worried about a scene." I looked at Mrs. Sterling. "Enjoy the gala," I said. "I hear the club's finance committee has been very creative this year." I turned and walked away, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't stay for dinner. I walked straight out the front doors, past the valet, and into the night air. I felt sick, but also strangely light. The illusion was gone. There was no misunderstanding. There was no family synergy. There was only the predator and the prey. I drove back to my apartment. But I couldn't sit still. I needed to find something, anything, that felt real. I went into my closet and pulled down an old plastic bin from the top shelf. It was my keepsake box, the one thing I had managed to take with me when I moved out. It was filled with the debris of childhood, participation ribbons, old report cards, a dried corsage from prom. I dug to the bottom. I was looking for a photo of me and my grandmother, the only person who had ever made me feel truly safe. My hand brushed against something stuck to the bottom of the box. It was a thick envelope, wedged under the cardboard flap. I pulled it out. It wasn't addressed to me. It just had a name written on the front in elegant, looping script. Madeline, age 11. I frowned. I had never seen this before. I opened it. Inside was a greeting card. The front showed a watercolor of a bird in flight. I opened the card. My brave little bird. "Today you are 11. I cannot be there to see you blow out the candles. But please know that you are loved beyond measure. The world can be a hard place, and people often try to make us small to fit into their pockets. Do not let them. You are made of stronger stuff. I have built a nest for you, even if you cannot see it yet. One day, it will be yours. Love always. Eleanor Vance." I stared at the signature. Eleanor Vance, the grantor, the stranger. The card was dated April 4th, 2001, the same date the trust was established. I looked at the envelope again. It had been opened. The seal was broken. My parents had seen this card. They had read it. And then they had hidden it. They hadn't just stolen the money. They had intercepted the love. They had taken a message from a woman who wanted me to feel strong, and they had buried it in a box of junk, letting me grow up believing I was alone. I sat on the floor of my closet, clutching the card to my chest, and wept. I wept for the 11-year-old girl who thought she wasn't good enough. I wept for the years of apologies I had offered for existing. But as the tears dried, something else took their place, a cold, hard resolve. They had kept the card like a hostage note, proof that they controlled the narrative, but they had made a mistake. They hadn't destroyed it. And now, I knew her name. Eleanor Vance wasn't a stranger. She was the one person who had actually seen me. I stood up, wiping my face. I took a picture of the card and texted it to Elise. I found the connection. I wrote, "And I'm done collecting. I want to fight." The letter from my parents' lawyers was printed on paper so thick it felt more like a wedding invitation than a legal threat. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday, delivered by a courier who looked bored as he handed me the envelope that would officially sever the last organic tether between me and the people who raised me. I sat in Elise's office while she read it aloud. Her voice was flat, stripping the venom out of the words to examine them like specimens under a microscope. Our clients, Robert and Catherine Simmons, are deeply concerned by the aggressive and baseless assertions made in your recent correspondence. Elise read. She looked up at me over her reading glasses. They go on to say that you are clearly confused regarding the nature of the family finances. They claim you are not a named beneficiary of any active trust and suggest that you are being manipulated by opportunists seeking to exploit a family misunderstanding. Opportunists, I repeated. Meaning you? Meaning anyone who encourages you to look at the ledger, Elise said. She tossed the letter onto the desk. It is a standard defense. Deny, diminish, discredit. They are trying to make you feel like a child who has wandered into a conversation between adults. They want you to doubt your own memory. It was working, in a way, not the doubt. I had the card from Eleanor Vance, the letter from the archives, the gut-deep knowledge that I was right. But the feeling of being small. They were rewriting reality, and they had hired a firm that charged $800 an hour to help them do it. We proceed with the demand for accounting. Elise said firmly, but be careful. They will try a new tactic now. Aggression didn't work, so they will try absorption. 2 days later, the invitation came. It wasn't a summons. It was a text from my mother. Madeline, we hate this distance. Please, can we just sit down and talk? No lawyers, just us. We want to clear the air. Lunch at the conservatory? Friday at noon? The conservatory was their favorite spot, a glass-walled restaurant overlooking the botanical gardens where they liked to be seen eating Cobb salads and drinking iced tea. It was public, neutral, and expensive. I showed the text to Elise. Go, she said, but take nothing, sign nothing, listen to everything. I arrived 5 minutes late. My parents were already seated at a corner table, the best one in the house. My mother was wearing a pastel cardigan that made her look soft, maternal. My father stood up when he saw me, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but did a good job of mimicking warmth. Maddie, he said, pulling out my chair. I'm glad you came. I sat down, placing my purse on the floor. I didn't return the smile. We ordered iced teas. We talked about the weather. We talked about the traffic. It was a surreal pantomime of a family lunch, the tension humming beneath the surface like a high-voltage wire. Finally, after the salads arrived, my father cleared his throat. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He placed it on the table between us. We have been doing a lot of thinking, he said, about what you said, about how you feel excluded. We never wanted you to feel that way, my mother added, her eyes shimmering with sudden, summoned moisture. We have always tried to do what is best for you, but we realize we have been hard on you lately. The refinancing business. It was a mistake to pressure you. I looked at the envelope. What is this? It is a fresh start, my father said. He tapped the envelope. We know you have been wanting to buy a place in the city. We know the market is tough. Inside that envelope is a check for $50,000. It is a gift, for a down payment on a condo. I stared at the white rectangle. $50,000. It was a lot of money. It was also a fraction of what they had stolen. And? I asked. And nothing, my mother said quickly. It is a gift. My father held up a hand. Well, there is a small formality, just to keep things clean for our accountant. Since this is a substantial gift, we just need a document signed stating that this satisfies any and all financial expectations you might have. It is just a waiver. Madeline, a way to say we are square, so we can put all this ugliness behind us and be a family again. I reached out and took the envelope. I didn't open it. I could feel the weight of the check inside, and the thicker paper of the waiver. A waiver, I said slowly. A document that says I will not pursue family financial matters? Essentially, my father said, taking a sip of his tea. It protects everyone. It allows us to move forward. I looked at him. He looked so reasonable. He looked like a father helping his daughter. But I knew what this was. It wasn't a gift. It was a settlement. It was a bribe to stop digging. If I signed this, I would be signing away my right to the audit. I would be signing away the truth about Eleanor Vance. I would be agreeing to their version of history for the price of a condo down payment. I slid the envelope back across the tablecloth. I didn't flinch. My mother's smile faltered. "Madeline, don't be stubborn. This is a generous offer." "It is," I agreed. "But I don't want a gift. I want transparency. I want to see the trust documents. I want to know where the money went for the last 20 years. My father set his glass down. The ice cubes clinked. A sharp, brittle sound. "Madeline," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "you are chasing ghosts. There is nothing to find. But if you keep digging, you are going to hurt people. You are going to embarrass us. I am not trying to embarrass you," I said calmly. "I am trying to understand who I am." He leaned forward. His face was still composed, but there was a hardness in his jaw that I recognized. It was the look he gave waiters who messed up his order, the look he gave contractors who quoted him too high. "Let me give you some advice," he said softly. "Not as your father, but as a man who understands how the world works. Families don't survive audits." The words hung in the air between us. Families don't survive audits. It sounded like wisdom. It sounded like a lament. But it was a threat. He was telling me that if I looked at the numbers, I would lose the family. He was holding their love hostage against their ledger. "Then maybe we weren't a family to begin with," I said. "Maybe we were just a business arrangement." I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my drink. I just picked up my purse. "Keep the money." I said, "I will wait for the court order." I walked out of the restaurant, my legs shaking, but my head clear. I had passed the test. They had offered me the carrot, and I had refused it. Now, I knew, would come the stick. I went straight to Elise's office, but she wasn't there. She was in court. Instead, I met with Victor Hale, the forensic accountant. He was in a small conference room, surrounded by stacks of paper. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his eyes were bright with the thrill of the hunt. "I found the leak," he said without preamble. He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a complex diagram of arrows and boxes. "You were right about the Highland Club," he said, "but it is smarter than I thought. Your father didn't just donate to the club's charity. He used the charity as a pass-through. Explain it to me." I said, sitting down. Victor pointed to the first box. "The Meridian Trust writes a check to the Highland Civic Foundation for community development grants. 50,000 here, 20,000 there. Perfectly legal on the surface." He moved his finger to the next box. "But the foundation doesn't spend the money on parks or schools. They award grants to a nonprofit called the Metro Preservation Society. Sounds noble, right?" I nodded. "The Metro Preservation Society has one vendor they pay exclusively for consulting and logistical support. A company called Apex Management." Victor clicked a key, and a document appeared on the screen. It was a corporate filing for Apex Management. "Look at the registered address for Apex." Victor said. I looked. 412 Sycamore Lane. Suite B? I frowned. "I know that address. That's the strip mall where my Uncle Marcus has his office." "Exactly," Victor said. "Your father's brother." "The one who sells commercial insurance. Apex Management is listed as a property management firm, but they don't manage any properties. They just collect checks from the nonprofit." "And then?" I asked. "And then," Victor said, clicking another key, "Apex Management pays consulting fees to a personal account. We can't see the name on the account without a subpoena, but look at the dates of the withdrawals." He pulled up a timeline. June 2015. Apex pays out $40,000. 2 weeks later, your parents put a new slate roof on the house. January 2018. Apex pays out $60,000. That same month, your parents took that month-long trip to Tuscany. You remember? They sent you a postcard. I stared at the screen. The dates matched perfectly. They were laundering my inheritance through a charity and my uncle's shell company to pay for their renovations and vacations. It's theft, I whispered. It's racketeering, Victor corrected. It involves multiple parties, wire fraud, and tax evasion. If we can prove this chain, your father isn't just looking at removal as trustee. He is looking at prison. The weight of that word settled on me. Prison. I didn't want my father in prison. I just wanted him to stop lying. I wanted him to admit that the money he used to buy his status was mine. But the betrayal ran deeper than money. That weekend, the social narrative finally reached me. I was at the grocery store in my old neighborhood, visiting a friend. I ran into Mrs. Gable, a woman who had lived down the street from us when I was a child. She was elderly now, leaning on a cane, but her mind was sharp. "Madeline!" she exclaimed, clutching my arm. "Oh, honey, I was just thinking about you. I saw your mother at the bridge club yesterday." "Oh?" I said, bracing myself. "She was so upset." Mrs. Gable said, lowering her voice. "She was telling the girls about the trouble you're having, the mental strain." My jaw tightened. "But she spoke so beautifully about you," Mrs. Gable continued. "She reminded us all of how they took you in, how you were, well, not really theirs." I froze. "What?" Mrs. Gable looked confused. "Well, that you were a distant relation they took in out of kindness, that they saved you from a bad situation. We all just think it is so saintly of them, after all these years, to still be supporting you. Even when you lash out, it is a testament to their charity." The world tilted. "They took me in?" I asked, my voice hollow. Mrs. Gable patted my arm. "Oh, honey, don't be embarrassed. Everyone knows adoption is hard. Even informal adoption. They love you just the same." I walked away from her, leaving my basket in the middle of the aisle. Informal adoption. Not really theirs. They had told people I wasn't their daughter. For 30 years. They had let the town believe I was a charity case, a stray they had fed. It explained everything. The fainting praise. The way guests looked at me with pity. The responsibility tests. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my origin. They had weaponized my identity to make themselves look like saints. Look at us, raising this broken bird. Aren't we wonderful? I drove to their house. I didn't call. I didn't text. I walked through the front door without knocking. They were in the living room, watching the news. "You told people I wasn't yours." I said. My mother looked up, startled. "Madeline? You told Mrs. Gable. You told the bridge club. You told everyone that I was taken in, that I wasn't real family." My mother stood up, her face crumpling instantly. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, but now I saw the strings. "Madeline, stop it," she cried. "You are upsetting yourself." "I am not upsetting myself," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I am asking you why you lied to an entire community about who I am." "I was protecting you," she sobbed. "There were rumors about your stability, about where you came from. We wanted people to be kind to you. We wanted them to understand why you were different." "Different?" I asked. "I was different because you treated me differently." My father stood up, placing himself between us. "That is enough," he said calmly. "No, it is not enough." I said. "You stole my money, and you stole my name. You made me a guest in my own life. Why are you trying to destroy everyone?" he asked. The question stopped me. He didn't deny it. He just reframed it. "I am not the one destroying things." I said. "You are," he said, his voice steady, reasonable. "You are tearing apart this family over money. You are attacking your mother. Look at her." My mother was weeping into her hands, a portrait of victimhood. "You are cruel." "Madeline," my father said, "we gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." With audits and accusations, I looked at them, the weeping woman, the stoic, disappointed man. They were perfect. They were impenetrable. They believed their own lie so deeply that my truth couldn't touch them. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I just left. The next morning, Elise called me in early. "I found something," She said. She had a file on her desk, stamped with the seal of the family court. We dug into the archives of the county where Eleanor Vance lived. Elise said, "We found a sealed guardianship record from 26 years ago." She opened the file. Eleanor Vance petitioned for guardianship of a child. She said, "You? Me?" I asked. "But I lived with my parents." "Listen," Elise said. "The petition wasn't for physical custody. It was for financial guardianship. Eleanor Vance was wealthy. She was trying to set up a mechanism to transfer assets to you, but the court record shows she was terrified." "Terrified of what?" "Of your father's side of the family." Elise said, "Specifically, his brother, Marcus, and by extension, your father." She read from the document. Petitioner states that the biological family has a history of speculative financial entanglements and expresses grave concern that any direct inheritance will be absorbed into the family's debts. Petitioner seeks to establish a trust that bypasses the parents entirely to ensure the child's future is not leveraged. I sat back in the chair. "She knew," I whispered, 26 years ago. "She knew they would take it. She tried to stop it." Elise said, "That's why she created the trust. That's why she wrote the letter. But she died before you turned 18. And somehow, your father maneuvered himself into the trustee position. He waited until the watchdog was dead, and then he let the fox into the henhouse." I went home that night and sat in my dark living room. I felt a strange, dizzying whiplash. I looked at the photos on my phone, pictures of Christmas mornings, my mother brushing my hair, my father teaching me to ride a bike. I remembered feeling loved. I remembered their hands being warm. How could that be true? And this also be true? How could they love me and steal from me? How could they hug me and lie to the world about me? It was a grief sharper than death. If they had been monsters, it would have been easy. I could hate them. But they weren't monsters. They were people who loved me conditionally. They loved me as long as I was useful. They loved me as long as I was the prop in their play. I grieved for the little girl who had tried so hard to be good, not realizing the game was rigged from the start. 2 days later, the phone rang in Elise's office while I was there. Elise answered, listened for a long time, and then put the call on speaker. "Madeline," she said, "I want you to listen to this." There was a crackle of static, and then an elderly voice, shaking with fear. "Is she there?" the voice asked. "She is," Elise said. "Go ahead. Mrs. Higgins." I recognized the name. Mrs. Higgins had been our housekeeper when I was in elementary school. She had been let go when I was 12. "Madeline?" Mrs. Higgins whispered. "Oh, child, I saw the news." "Well, not the news, but people are talking about the court case." "Mrs. Higgins," I said, "it's me. I shouldn't be calling." She said, "Your father, he is a powerful man. He can make things difficult. We can protect you." Elise said, "But we need to know what you heard." There was a long pause. "It was a long time ago." Mrs. Higgins said, "You were maybe 10. I was in the kitchen. They were in the dining room. They had just come back from the lawyer. They were drinking champagne." "What did they say?" I asked. Your father was laughing. Mrs. Higgins said, he said, "It's done. The old bat is dead, and the paperwork is signed." "And your mother?" she said. "Do you think Madeline will ever find out?" I held my breath. "And your father said, 'The girl will never know what she's worth. We'll make sure she thinks she's lucky just to have a roof.'" The line went silent. Save for the sound of Mrs. Higgins' breathing, I sat there, the words searing into my brain. The girl will never know what she's worth. It wasn't just about the money. It was the philosophy of my existence. They had built a cage out of gratitude and locked me inside it, holding the key that was made of my own gold. "Mrs. Higgins," Elise said softly, "would you be willing to testify to that?" I'm scared," the old woman said. "I know," Elise said, "but if you speak, it stops them from doing it to anyone else." I heard a sigh, ragged and old. "Okay," Mrs. Higgins whispered, "for the little bird, I always loved that little bird. Elise hung up the phone. She looked at me. We have the money trail, she said. We have the motive. And now, we have the voice. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I felt cold, but it was the cold of a surgeon washing up before an operation. File the petition, I said. I want my life back. The petition Elise filed was a heavy, dense document, 60 pages of legal argumentation that landed on the docket of the probate court with a silent thud. It was titled, In Re, the Meridian Trust, but it felt like a declaration of war. We were asking for two things: the immediate removal of Robert Simmons as trustee due to breach of fiduciary duty, and an emergency temporary restraining order on all trust assets. We cited the educational payments to a student who wasn't the beneficiary. We cited the payments to the shell company, Apex Management. We cited the commingling of funds with the Highland Civic Foundation. Elise told me that filing the petition was the easy part. The hard part, she warned, would be living in the blast zone. She was right. The explosion didn't happen with shouting matches or angry voicemails. It happened with silence. For 3 days after the filing, my phone was dead quiet. No texts from my mother asking if I had found a condo. No calls from my father asking about my car. Just a vacuum where my family used to be. And then, the noise started. But it was coming from the wrong direction. It started with a text from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who lived in Florida and usually only messaged me on birthdays. Maddie. I just heard, I am so sorry things have gotten so bad for you. Please know that we love you. No matter what kind of trouble you're in, if you need help with a treatment center, Uncle Dave and I can chip in. I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my eyes. Treatment center? I typed back, my fingers shaking. What are you talking about? Aunt Linda? I am fine. Her reply came 3 dots at a time, agonizingly slow. Your mother told me about the debt and the episodes. She is worried sick you're going to hurt yourself. Just don't push them away. Honey, they want to save you. I dropped the phone on my couch cushion as if it were hot. They weren't fighting the legal battle yet. They were fighting the PR battle. They knew they couldn't explain the missing money, so they were destroying the credibility of the person asking where it went. If I was unstable, if I was an addict, if I was drowning in gambling debt. Then my sudden demand for a trust audit wasn't a righteous quest for truth. It was the desperate lashing out of a junkie looking for a fix. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was working. Over the next week, the social erosion was palpable. I was uninvited from a bridal shower for a childhood friend. The hostess sent a polite, pained email saying they were keeping the guest list tight. But I knew her mother played tennis with my mother. I received a concerned LinkedIn message from a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, asking if I was safe. But the real blow came at work. I worked at a mid-sized consulting firm, a place that prided itself on discretion and professionalism. I had always kept my family life separate from my desk, building a reputation based on data analysis and late nights. On a Thursday morning, the senior managing partner, Mr. Henderson, stopped by my cubicle. Mr. Henderson was a man who occupied the same social stratosphere as my parents. He was a member of the Highland Club, a donor to the same foundations. Madeline, do you have a moment? He asked. I stood up. Of course, sir. He didn't invite me into his office. He stood in the hallway, leaning casually against the wall, holding a cup of coffee. He smiled, but his eyes were scanning my face, looking for cracks. I ran into your father at the club last night, he said. My stomach dropped. I kept my face neutral. Oh? I hope he was well. He seemed tired, Henderson said. He mentioned you two are going through a difficult patch. Something about a legal misunderstanding? It is a private family matter. I said, keeping my voice steady. It has no bearing on my work. Henderson nodded slowly. Of course. We value your work here, Madeline. But you know how this industry is. Perception is currency. We deal with sensitive clients. We need our consultants to project stability. I felt the threat slide under my skin like a needle. I am completely stable. Mr. Henderson, I said, and I assure you, my focus is entirely on the outcome of the Q3 project. Good, he said. He took a sip of his coffee. I would hate to see personal drama overshadow professional potential. Your father speaks very highly of you. Despite everything, he is very concerned about your well-being. He walked away. I sat back down in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. My father had gotten to my boss. He hadn't demanded I be fired. That would be too crude. He had simply planted the seed. Madeline is troubled. Madeline is messy. And in the corporate world, messy was worse than incompetent. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale. I looked exactly like the unstable woman they were painting me to be. I will not let them win. I whispered to the reflection, I will not break. I went back to my desk and worked for 10 hours straight. I didn't leave until the cleaning crew was vacuuming the lobby. The next morning, I met Elise and Victor at the courthouse. The hearing was still 2 weeks away, but things were moving fast behind the scenes. Victor looked grim. He had his laptop open on a bench outside the courtroom. They are moving, he said. Who is moving? I asked. Your parents? Victor said. Or rather, their assets. I have alerts set up on all the entities we identified. Last night, at 2 a.m, a new LLC was registered in Delaware. Blue Heron Holdings. Blue Heron. I said, that was the name of their boat. The one they sold 5 years ago. It's sloppy, Victor said. They are reusing names because they are in a panic. 2 hours after the LLC was formed, there was a request to transfer the title of the commercial property, the one the trust owns a stake in, to this new entity. They are trying to liquidate, Elise said. Her face hard. They know the freeze order is coming. They are trying to hide the equity in a shell company before the judge signs the injunction. Can they do that? I asked. Not legally, Elise said, but possession is 9/10 of the law. If they move it, we have to chase it, and chasing takes years. We need to stop it now. She walked into the clerk's office with a stack of papers. I watched her go, feeling a surge of nausea. My parents were looting the burning building. They knew the game was up, so they were grabbing the silver on their way out. Elise emerged 20 minutes later. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. She said, "It goes into effect immediately. The banks are being notified as we speak. If your father tries to move 1 cent out of that trust account today, the system will lock him out." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. We stopped the bleeding. Victor said, "Now we need to see the wound." The subpoena Elise had served on the bank yielded fruit 3 days later. It wasn't just the financial statements this time, it was the internal communication logs. We met Mr. Alderman again. The trust officer looked significantly less arrogant than he had during our first meeting. He looked like a man who realized he might be named as a co-defendant in a negligence lawsuit. He slid a file across the desk without making eye contact. "These are the contact logs you requested," he said. Elise opened the file. She read in silence for a moment, then pushed it toward me. "Read the entry from December 2012, she said. I looked at the log. It was a digital printout of customer service notes. Date: December 14th, 2012. Time: 10:45 a.m. Agent: S. Jenkins. Note: attempted to contact beneficiary M. Simmons regarding age of majority distribution options. Call intercepted by trustee R. Simmons. Trustee states, beneficiary is currently unreachable due to ongoing mental health treatment. Trustee advises no direct contact to avoid triggering an episode. Trustee requests all correspondence be routed to his home address for screening." I stared at the date. December 14th, 2012. I was 22 years old. I had just graduated college. I was living in my parents' house for the holidays. I remembered that day specifically because we had gone ice skating in the morning and made cookies in the afternoon. I wasn't in a treatment center. I was in their kitchen, frosting gingerbread men, while my father took a call in his study and told a bank officer I was too crazy to speak to. He blocked them. I whispered, "They tried to call me to give me the money," and he blocked them. It wasn't just theft. It was interception. He had stood between me and my future, holding a phone to his ear, lying with the casual ease of a sociopath. "And look at this," Elise said, turning the page. Date: April 4th, 2016. Agent: Compliance Department. Note: Trustee R. Simmons submitted waiver of distribution on behalf of beneficiary, citing personal request for asset accumulation. No signature from beneficiary on file. Trustee cited power of attorney. Request approved by senior manager. He told them I didn't want the money. I said, he told them I wanted to save it, and he claimed he had power of attorney. Elise said, "Did you ever sign a power of attorney?" "Never." I said, "Then that is fraud." Elise said, "Plain and simple." And the bank approved it because he was a high-value client. Mr. Alderman shifted in his seat. "We relied on the trustee's representations," he murmured. "That is standard practice. It is standard negligence." Elise shot back, "And you will be hearing about it in court." But the most damaging document wasn't in the contact logs. It was in the appendix of the trust instrument itself, a section the bank had finally released under the pressure of the subpoena. It was titled Article 7, Contingent Beneficiaries and Identity Verification. Elise read it aloud in the car as we drove away from the bank. The primary beneficiary, Madeline Simmons, shall be entitled to the full corpus of the trust upon reaching the age of 25, provided that she satisfies the identity threshold. "What is the identity threshold?" I asked. Elise read on. "The grantor, Eleanor Vance, acknowledges the complex legal standing of the beneficiary within the Simmons household. Therefore, to prevent fraudulent claims, the beneficiary must present the original certificate of acknowledgement signed by the grantor and the original guardian ad litem. This certificate confirms the identity of the child as the intended recipient." She paused. "If the primary beneficiary fails to present this original document within 1 year of a challenge, or if the primary beneficiary is deemed legally incapacitated, the trust assets shall pass to the alternate beneficiary." "Who is the alternate beneficiary?" I asked, though I already felt the cold creep of knowledge up my spine. Elise turned the page. "Julian Simmons." I closed my eyes. "Julian, my cousin. The one who represents the family. The one they paid for. The one they groomed." It all made sense. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a deafening click. They weren't just stealing the money to spend it. They were trying to trigger the contingency clause. If they could prove I was incapacitated, by spreading rumors that I was unstable, by claiming I was in treatment, then the money would legally go to Julian. Or, if they could ensure I never found that certificate of acknowledgement, the money would go to Julian. And who controlled Julian? My father. Julian worshipped him. If Julian got the millions, my father would still be the puppet master. He would keep the money in the real family. They need Julian to be the heir. I said, "Because they don't think I count. I'm just the placeholder." "And that document," Elise said. "The certificate of acknowledgement. Do you have it?" "No." I said, "I've never even heard of it." "Your parents have it," Elise said, "or they destroyed it. Without that piece of paper, according to this clause, you have no claim. The trust was written by a paranoid woman who wanted to be sure the right child got the money, but she inadvertently gave your parents the weapon to cut you out. All they have to do is hide one piece of paper. I need to find it." I said, "Madeline," Elise warned, "you cannot do anything illegal. We can subpoena the document, but if they say it's lost, we can't prove they have it. I know where they keep the important papers." I said, "I know where the bodies are buried." "I'm not hearing this," Elise said, turning up the radio. 2 days later, my parents left for the coast. It was their annual decompression weekend before the start of the autumn social season. I saw the post on my mother's Facebook, a picture of packed suitcases and a caption about needing peace and healing. I waited until nightfall. I drove to the house in my old sedan, parking 3 streets over. I walked through the neighbor's yard, cutting through the hedge the way I used to when I was 16 and sneaking out to meet boys. The house loomed in the darkness, a massive silhouette against the starry sky. It looked like a fortress. It looked like a lie. I punched the code into the garage keypad. 1985. The year they were married. The door groaned open. I slipped inside and hit the button to close it immediately. The house smelled of lemon polish and potpourri. It was the smell of my childhood, a scent that used to mean safety, but now triggered a flight response in my lizard brain. I moved through the kitchen, the moonlight casting long shadows across the granite countertops. I didn't turn on any lights. I knew this house by heart. I knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway. I knew how to open the study door without the latch clicking. The study was my father's sanctuary. It was where he drank his scotch, where he made his calls, where he had intercepted the bank's attempts to save me. I went straight to the desk. It was a massive mahogany piece, older than I was. I tried the drawers, locked. I wasn't surprised. But I also knew my father's arrogance. He didn't think anyone could get in, so he didn't hide the key well. He kept it in the false bottom of the antique globe that stood in the corner. I walked over to the globe. I lifted the northern hemisphere. There, resting in the hollowed-out center, was a small brass key. I took it, my hands shaking. I felt like a criminal. I felt like a violation. But then I remembered the ledger. I remembered the unstable whispers. I remembered the tuition for Julian. I unlocked the central drawer. It was organized with military precision. Files labeled taxes, investments, property. I flipped through them. Nothing about the Meridian Trust. He wouldn't keep that in the main file. I checked the side drawers. Nothing. I sat back, frustration rising in my throat. Where would he put it? Then I remembered the safe behind the painting. But I didn't have the combination. I looked around the room. My eyes landed on the bookshelf. There was a row of leather-bound journals. My father's memoirs, he called them. He rarely wrote in them, but he liked how they looked. I pulled one down. It was empty. I pulled down another, and then I saw it. Tucked between the history of the Roman Empire and a biography of Churchill was a thin, metal lockbox. It wasn't a safe. It was a document case. I pulled it out. It was locked. But the lock was flimsy. I used a letter opener from the desk to pry the latch. It popped open with a snap. Inside, there was a single envelope. It was old. The paper yellowed and brittle. It was addressed to Arthur Henderson, Esca, the original attorney for the trust. It had never been mailed. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Certificate of acknowledgement. My heart leaped. This was it. This was the key. I unfolded it. It was a photocopy. My stomach dropped. A photocopy. The court needed the original. But it was what was on the photocopy that made me freeze. It was a standard legal form, signed by Eleanor Vance and a guardian ad litem named Peter Finch. It stated clearly that Madeline Elizabeth Simmons was the sole intended beneficiary of the Meridian Trust. But the bottom right corner of the page, the place where the official raised seal of the notary would have been on the original, was gone. It had been cut off. Someone had taken a pair of scissors and physically sliced the seal off the document before photocopying it. I stared at the jagged edge of the paper. Why? If they had the original, why keep a mutilated photocopy? And then I understood. They didn't have the original anymore. They had destroyed it. But my father, in his meticulous, hoarding need for control, couldn't bear to throw away the information. He wanted to know what it said, but he wanted to ensure it could never be used. He had cut the seal, the source of its legal power, and then shredded the original. He kept the copy as a trophy, a reminder that he had neutered the threat. It was a profound violation. It was a murder of my identity. I took the photocopy, I folded it, and put it in my pocket. I checked the box again. There was one other thing. A small notebook. I opened it. It was a ledger. Handwritten in my father's script. 1999. Transferred $20,000 to Marcus for consulting. 2004. Tuition advance for Julian. Coded as education. 2010. Refinance kickback. $15,000. It was a confession. It was a personal record of every dollar he had siphoned. He hadn't trusted the digital files, So he had kept a hard copy. I took the notebook too. I stood up, my legs trembling so hard I had to grip the desk. I had crossed a line. I had broken into their home. I had stolen their property. If they caught me, they could have me arrested. They could use this to prove I was unstable, criminal, dangerous. But I didn't care. I had the proof. I had the map of the theft. And I had the evidence that they had tampered with the identity document. I locked the desk. I put the key back in the globe. I wiped the handle of the letter opener with the sleeve of my sweater. I walked out of the house, locking the door behind me. As I stepped into the cool night air, I looked back at the house. It looked the same as it always had. Imposing, perfect, silent. But it was dead to me now. It wasn't a home. It was a crime scene. I got into my car and drove. I didn't go home. I drove to Elise's office, even though it was 3 a.m. I sat in the parking lot, clutching the stolen papers to my chest, waiting for the sun to come up. I wasn't Madeline the daughter anymore. I wasn't Madeline the victim. I was the plaintiff, and I was going to burn their house down with the paper they had tried to hide. The next morning, I laid the photocopy and the notebook on Elise's desk. She didn't ask where I got them. She didn't scold me. She put on her glasses and looked at the cut corner of the certificate. She ran her finger over the jagged edge. Spoliation of evidence. She whispered, "That is the legal term. If we can prove they destroyed the original, the court can infer that the original would have been adverse to their case, the cut corner. It proves intent. You don't accidentally cut the seal off a document. You do it to kill it." She looked at the notebook. "And this is the smoking gun." She looked up at me. Her eyes were serious, but there was a glint of steel in them. "We aren't just going to remove him as trustee, Madeline. We are going to destroy his reputation. We are going to show the court that he didn't just steal money. He stole the law." The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I went home to shower and change. I felt different, lighter, but harder. I checked my phone. There was a voicemail from my mother. "Madeline, we're back early. The coast was too foggy. We're going to stop by your apartment later. We have found something we think you should have. A family heirloom. Please be home." Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. They knew. They had gone into the study. They had checked the globe. They had found the lockbox empty. They knew I had the ledger. The family heirloom was a lure. They were coming to negotiate. Or threaten. I texted Elise. "They know. They are coming to me." Elise replied instantly. "Do not let them in. Come to the office. Now." I grabbed my bag. I didn't even turn off the lights. I ran out the door. My heart pounding in my throat. I was done playing the obedient daughter. I was done waiting for permission to exist. I had the truth in my pocket, and for the first time in 33 years, I held the cards. The fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about existence. They had tried to erase me. Now, I was going to make sure the world saw exactly who they were. I got into my car and merged onto the highway, watching the skyline of the city rise before me. Somewhere in that city, a judge was reading a petition. Somewhere, a trust officer was sweating over a logbook. And somewhere behind me, my parents were realizing that the little bird had grown talons. The end game had begun. I arrived at Elise's firm and was ushered into a conference room. Victor was there, pacing. "We have a problem," he said. "What?" I asked, clutching my bag. "The notebook," he said. "The handwriting. It's your father's. Clearly. But looking at the entries, some of the recent ones don't match the bank records." "What do you mean?" "He means," Elise said, walking in, "that your father is keeping 2 sets of books, the official fraudulent ones, and the real ones. The notebook you found is the real one, but there are entries here for payments we didn't know about." She pointed to a line in the stolen notebook. "June 2023, $50,000, the blackmail fund." "Blackmail?" I asked. "Who is he blackmailing? Or who is blackmailing him?" Elise corrected. She tapped the page. "If someone else knows about this, Madeline, someone else has leverage. And if we can find them, we have a witness who isn't bound by family loyalty." I looked at the date, June 2023. That was the month the senior partner at my firm had started acting cold toward me. That was the month the whisper campaign had really started in earnest. Even before I knew about the trust, someone else knew, and my parents were paying them to keep quiet. Who? I asked. Victor looked at the notebook again. Next to the entry, he said, there are initials, G.L., G.L. I racked my brain. Friends? Relatives? Business partners? And then it hit me. The smell of lemon cleaner. The modest office. The man who had first told me about the trust. Graham Lyle, the attorney from the archives. He wasn't just a messenger. He was involved. My father was paying the man who had found me. Why? To control the release of information? To make sure I only found out enough to be confused, but not enough to win? Graham Lyle had told me the trust was messy. He had given me the breadcrumbs, but he hadn't given me the gun. He was playing both sides. We need to subpoena Graham Lyle, I said. Elise smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. Way ahead of you, she said. The process server is already on his way. The pieces were all there. The thief, the accomplice, the decoy, and the victim. But the victim was done bleeding. I looked at the photocopy of the cut document one last time. Madeline Simmons. I traced my name. I am real. I thought, and I am going to prove it. The conference room in Elise's office had become my second home, a glass-walled aquarium where I learned how to breathe underwater. We were 4 days away from the hearing on the petition to remove my father as trustee, and the air was thick with the scent of dry erase markers and stale coffee. Elise sat across from me, playing the role of the opposing counsel. She did not go easy on me. She knew that the firm my parents had hired, Sterling Associates, specialized in shredding the credibility of plaintiffs before they even took the stand. Ms. Simmons, Elise said, her voice dropping into a sneering, patronizing register. Isn't it true that you have a history of financial instability? That you have repeatedly asked your parents for assistance with basic living expenses? I felt the old reflex, the heat rising in my neck, the urge to explain, to justify. No, I only asked once when I was 22. I caught myself. I took a breath. My financial records are part of the discovery, I said, keeping my voice flat and monochromatic. They show I have been self-sufficient since the age of 23. Good, Elise said, dropping the character for a moment. But don't let your voice go up at the end. It sounds like a question. State it like a fact. The sky is blue. You are self-sufficient. Again. We went again. Ms. Simmons, your parents have provided you with a lifestyle most people would envy. Private clubs, luxury vacations. Is this lawsuit not simply an expression of ingratitude because they finally set a boundary? I looked at her. I am not suing for lifestyle. I said, I am suing for an accounting of a trust established in my name by Eleanor Vance. Better, Elise said. Remember, they will try to make this about feelings. They will try to make it about the ungrateful daughter versus the saintly parents. You have to make it about the math. Math does not have feelings. Math does not have gratitude. Math just is. I nodded, but my stomach was churning. The legal strategy was sound, but the emotional warfare was already bleeding through the walls. That night. My phone rang at 2 a.m. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, playing out scenarios where the judge laughed at me, where my father produced a document proving I was insane. I looked at the screen. Mother. Elise had told me not to answer. Do not engage, she had said. Everything you say can be used to paint you as erratic. But it was 2 a.m, and she was my mother. I slid the icon to answer. Hello? I whispered. There was a silence on the other end. But it wasn't empty. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the house I grew up in. I could hear the distinctive rhythm of her breathing. I always loved you. Madeline, she said. Her voice was soft, stripped of the social armor she wore in public. It sounded like the voice that used to read me bedtime stories before I realized the stories were edited. I gripped the phone. Mom, I said, just tell me the truth. That's all I want. "We saved you," she said, her voice drifting, as if she were talking to herself. "We took you in when no one else would. You have no idea how hard it was. To raise another woman's child and make her believe she belonged. Another woman's child." The words hit me like a physical blow. I knew it, intellectually. I had seen the documents, but hearing her say it, hearing her define me by my exclusion, tore something open. "Then why did you steal from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "If you loved me, why did you steal my future?" There was a long pause. Then she spoke again, but the softness was gone. It was replaced by a cold, clinical precision. "You are not who you think you are, Madeline." The line went dead. I sat up in bed, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone buzzing like a wasp. "You are not who you think you are." It was a psychological splinter, wedged deep in the soft tissue of my mind. Was it a threat? A revelation? Or just another gaslighting tactic designed to make me doubt my own foundation right before I walked into court? I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there, dissecting my identity, wondering if the person I saw in the mirror was a fabrication constructed by two people who needed a prop for their family tableau. The next morning, Victor Hale provided the anchor I needed. He didn't deal in identity crises. He dealt in invoices. I found the mechanism. He said when I arrived at the office, he was standing in front of a digital whiteboard, highlighting a column of numbers. "We knew about the payments to St. Jude's Academy for your cousin Julian." He said, "That was straightforward misappropriation, but I couldn't figure out where the bulk of the housing allowance went. The trust paid out $4,000 a month for beneficiary housing support for 5 years. You never saw a dime of that." "No," I said. "I paid rent on my studio apartment." Victor tapped the screen. The checks were cut to a vendor called Summit Residential Services. It sounds like a property management firm, but look at the invoice numbers. He zoomed in. Invoice 1045. Date: January 3rd, 2018. Invoice 1046. Date: February 3rd, 2018. "Now look at this," Victor said. He pulled up a separate file, a leaked expense report from the Highland Civic Foundation, the charity my father used to launder money. Invoice 1045. Date: January 3rd, 2018. Vendor: Apex Management. I frowned. They have the same invoice number? Not just the same number. Victor said, the same font, the same formatting error on the date line. Summit Residential and Apex Management are the same entity. Your father was using a template. He was cutting checks from the trust to a shell company to pay for housing, but the money was actually going to the mortgage on a condo in the city. "Which condo?" I asked. Victor pulled up a property deed. "Unit 4B at the Spire," he said, "purchased in 2018 by Blue Heron Holdings." I knew that building. It was a luxury high-rise. My parents stayed there when they came into the city for the opera. They called it their pied-à-terre. They bought themselves a vacation home with my housing allowance. I said, "And they were lazy about it," Victor said, grinning a shark-like grin. "Using the same invoice sequence for 2 different shell companies? That is a rookie mistake. It proves the entities are alter egos of your father. It pierces the corporate veil. We can prove he was paying himself." The logic of the math soothed the panic from my mother's phone call. She could say I wasn't who I thought I was, but the numbers said my father was exactly who I thought he was: a thief. That afternoon, Elise came into the conference room with a look on her face I hadn't seen before. It wasn't triumph, and it wasn't worry. It was a sort of reverent gravity. "I found someone," she said. She sat down and placed a recorder on the table. "We have been trying to track down anyone who knew Eleanor Vance, the trust creator," she said. "Most of her contemporaries are dead, but we found a woman named Mrs. Abernathy. She lives in a retirement community in Arizona. She was Eleanor's housekeeper and companion for 30 years. She pressed play. The voice that emerged was frail, raspy, but clear. "Eleanor was a hard woman," the voice said. "She didn't trust easily, but she loved that child. She used to pace the floor at night, Worrying. Worrying about what? Elise's voice asked on the recording. About the wolves. Mrs. Abernathy said. That's what she called them, the family. She said the child had been placed with the Simmons couple because the court thought they were the safe option, the biological father. He was the dangerous one, a grifter, a man who saw people as wallets. Eleanor said the Simmonses were boring, suburban, safe. That was the point. I listened, holding my breath. Safe. That was why I was there. I was a refugee sent to a neutral zone, but Eleanor wasn't stupid. The voice continued. She knew that even safe people can be corrupted by money. That's why she wrote the instructions. She told me, if they ever make her feel small, if they ever try to clip her wings to keep her in the yard, you tell the trustee to burn it down. Did she leave a specific letter to that effect? Elise asked. She did. Mrs. Abernathy said. She called it the dignity clause. She said the money wasn't for fancy cars. It was for freedom. If the money was being used to control the child instead of free her, the trust was supposed to dissolve and pay out to a charity immediately. She wanted to remove the bait. The recording clicked off. I sat in silence. The dignity clause. My parents hadn't just stolen the money. They had violated the core philosophy of the gift. Eleanor Vance had given me a sword to cut my chains, and my parents had melted it down to make more chains. We can use this, Elise said. It speaks to the intent of the grantor. It frames their control tactics not just as bad parenting, but as a violation of the trust's purpose. 2 days before the hearing, the settlement offer arrived. It came via courier, a thick envelope from Sterling Associates. Elise opened it. She read the cover letter, her eyebrows raising. They are scared, she said. What is it? I asked. They are offering a lump sum, she said. $500,000. $500,000. It was 10 times the gift they had offered for the condo. It was life-changing money. But there are conditions. Elise said, you have to withdraw the petition with prejudice, meaning you can never refile. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement covering the existence of the trust and all family financial matters. And, she paused, and you have to publicly retract your statements regarding the misunderstanding specifically to the board of the Highland Civic Foundation. I laughed. It was a bitter, jagged sound. They want me to apologize. I said, they want to pay me $500,000 to tell the world I'm a liar so they can keep their standing at the club. Elise looked at me. It is a guaranteed payout. Madeline, litigation is a gamble. If we go to court, we could lose, or we could win, and they could appeal for years, draining the assets until there is nothing left. This ends it on Friday. I looked at the check attached to the letter. It was signed by my father. The signature was aggressive, the ink dark. I thought about the money. I could buy a house. I could pay off my student loans. I could disappear. But if I took it, I would be agreeing to their story. I would be the crazy daughter who was bought off. I would be validating the lie that I was not who I thought I was, and I would be betraying Eleanor Vance. She hadn't left me money to be quiet. She had left me money to be free. No, I said. Elise nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I hoped you would say that. I don't want their hush money, I said. I want the accounting. I want the judge to see the duplicate invoices. I want the world to know that the safe family was just a different kind of predator. I grabbed a pen and wrote, "Rejected," across the face of the offer letter. Send it back, I said. The response to my rejection was immediate and chaotic. The next morning, Elise's phone rang. It was a partner from Sterling Associates. Elise put it on speaker. Elise, this is Jonathan Sterling. I am calling to inform you that effective immediately, our firm is withdrawing from the representation of Robert and Catherine Simmons. Elise's eyes widened. Withdrawing? We are 48 hours from a hearing. We have filed a motion to withdraw based on irreconcilable differences regarding the conduct of the case. Sterling said. His voice was stiff, professional, but underneath it, I heard relief. We cannot proceed ethically given recent revelations by the clients. He hung up. Elise sat back in her chair. They fired their lawyers? I asked. No, Elise said. Their lawyers fired them. That is huge. Madeline. Irreconcilable differences usually means the client asked the lawyer to do something illegal, or the lawyer found out the client had lied to them about material facts. Sterling saw the duplicate invoices, or maybe they saw the cut corner on the identity document. They realized they were representing a fraud, and they bailed to save their own license. So who represents them now? Elise checked the court docket online. It refreshed while we watched. New counsel of record, the Voros Group. Elise grimaced. Who are they? I asked. They are pit bulls. She said, they aren't estate planners. They are fixers. They handle messy divorces for celebrities and corporate damage control. They don't care about ethics. They care about winning. This just got dirtier. She was right. The Voros Group didn't file motions to dismiss. They filed motions to destroy. Within hours, they inundated us with discovery demands. They wanted my medical records for the last 10 years. They wanted my employment reviews. They wanted my college transcripts. They were looking for anything to paint me as incompetent. But in their aggression, they made a mistake. In their haste to dump thousands of documents on us to bury us in paperwork, they included a batch of emails that hadn't been scrubbed. Victor found it late that night. He called me over to his laptop. Look at this, he said. It was an email chain between my father and the original attorney, Arthur Henderson, dated 15 years ago. From Robert Simmons to Arthur Henderson. Subject: beneficiary disclosure. Arthur, I understand your concern about the reporting requirements. However, you need to understand the situation. The girl does not need to know the extent of the assets. Knowledge would only burden her. She needs stability, not options. I read the words. She needs stability. It sounded so protective. It sounded like a father worrying about a child who couldn't handle the weight of wealth. But then I read the next line, and we need control. If she has independent means, we lose the ability to guide her choices. The trust was a mistake by a bitter old woman. It is my job to correct it. Keep the statements internal. I will handle the conscience. We need control. There it was, in black and white. It wasn't about protection. It was about guidance. It was about keeping me on the leash. The trust was a mistake. It is my job to correct it. He admitted to subverting the grantor's intent. He admitted to hiding the statements. This is it, Elise said, reading over my shoulder. This is the smoking gun. It proves breach of duty. It proves malice. I stared at the screen. I will handle the conscience. He thought he was God. He thought he could rewrite the moral universe because he was the real family and I was just the project. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It wasn't the hot, tearful anger of the past. It was a glacial thing, solid and unbreakable. I don't want to just win in court, I said. Elise looked at me. What do you mean? The court hearing is Tuesday, I said, but the court is sealed. The public won't see this. They will just know there was a settlement or a judgment. My parents will spin it. They will say they stepped down voluntarily. They will say they did it to help me. What do you want to do? Elise asked. The Highland Civic Foundation annual meeting is tomorrow night. I said. Elise froze. Madeline, you can't go there. It's their turf. It's a public meeting. I said. They are honoring the donors. My father is the treasurer. He is going to be on stage giving a report on the financial health of the foundation. So, I said, we have proof that the foundation was used to launder stolen money. We have proof that he isn't a philanthropist. He's an embezzler. I looked at Victor. Can we serve the injunction at the meeting? Elise thought about it. Legally? Yes. A process server can serve a defendant anywhere. But it's aggressive. It's necessary. I said, if we serve him in private, he hides it. If we serve him on stage, in front of the people whose opinion matters more to him than his own daughter breaks. I don't want theatrics. Elise warned. Judges hate theatrics. It won't be theatrics. I said, it will be procedural compliance. Just publicly timed. Elise looked at the email on the screen. We need control. She looked at me. Okay, she said. If we are going to do this, we do it perfectly. No screaming, no accusations. We let the paper do the talking. We spent the next day planning the choreography of the destruction. Victor printed the duplicate invoices on large format boards, not to display, but to have ready for the board council. Elise prepared the courtesy copies of the lawsuit, highlighting the paragraph where the bank admitted to the interception of my mail. I went shopping. I bought a suit, not a dress. A suit, slate gray, sharp lines, tailored to within an inch of its life. It was the kind of suit a CEO wore to a merger. It was the kind of suit Eleanor Vance would have wanted me to wear. The hearing was technically the legal battleground, but the Highland Club was the psychological battleground. That was where the not real family narrative lived. That was where my mother told people I was a charity case. That was where they laughed about doing the hard part. If I wanted to dismantle the lie, I had to do it at the source. The night of the gala arrived. The air was crisp, the sky a bruised purple. I rode in the back of Elise's car. Victor was in the front seat, holding a briefcase that contained the dynamite. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Good luck with your little hearing next week. We have a new team. You are going to regret this." I didn't reply. I looked out the window as we turned into the long, winding driveway of the Highland Club. The valet stand was bustling. Expensive cars lined the drive. The windows of the clubhouse glowed with golden light, promising warmth, exclusion, and safety for those who belonged. I used to look at those windows and wish I was inside. I used to wish I was one of them. Now, I realized I was something else entirely. I wasn't the bird looking for a nest. I was the storm coming to blow it down. "Are you ready?" Elise asked, as she put the car in park. I checked the inside pocket of my blazer. The photocopy of the identity document with the cut corner was there, resting against my heart. "I am ready," I said. We stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under my heels. The sound was loud, rhythmic, inevitable. I walked toward the double doors, flanked by my attorney and my accountant. The doorman moved to stop us, seeing faces he didn't recognize. "Ticket?" he asked. Elise held up a leather folio. "Legal counsel for the foundation board." She lied smoothly. "We have urgent documents for the treasurer." The doorman hesitated, then stepped aside. We walked in. The ballroom was full. 300 people in black tie. My parents were at the head table on the dais. My father was adjusting the microphone, his smile benevolent, his hands resting on the podium. My mother was next to him, clapping politely, and next to her was Julian, my cousin, the alternate heir. He looked bored, handsome, and entitled. I stopped at the back of the room. My father began to speak. "Friends," he said, his voice booming over the speakers, "we gather here tonight to celebrate legacy, to celebrate the values that hold this community together: trust, integrity, family." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it. Trust, integrity, family. He was using the words he had murdered. Elise nodded to the process server, a nondescript man in a gray suit who had entered separately. "Go," she whispered. The server began to move down the center aisle. My father saw him. He frowned, pausing mid-sentence. He looked confused. He looked at the doorman, as if to ask why someone was interrupting his sermon. Then he saw me. I stepped out from the shadows of the doorway into the light. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just stood there, flanked by my witnesses, watching him. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a special effect. He gripped the podium. The process server reached the stage. He didn't climb the stairs. He simply reached up and placed a thick stack of papers on the edge of the dais, right in front of my father's shoes. "Robert Simmons?" the server said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence of the room. "You are served. Emergency injunction and motion for removal." The room went dead silent. A few people gasped. My father stared at the papers. Then he looked at me. In that moment, the distance between the podium and the door vanished. It was just the two of us, the creator of the lie and the proof of the truth. He looked at my mother. She had frozen, her hand halfway to her mouth. Julian looked confused. Glancing between the papers and me, I saw the realization hit my father's eyes. He knew about the email. He knew about the duplicate invoices. He knew that the stack of papers at his feet wasn't just a lawsuit, it was an autopsy of his reputation. Elise stepped forward, her voice calm and projecting to the board counsel who was sitting at the front table. "Mr. Sterling," she said to the board's lawyer, "we have also served the Foundation with notice of a forensic audit regarding commingled funds. We suggest you secure your records." The room erupted into whispers. My father leaned into the microphone. His voice was shaking. "This is a misunderstanding. My daughter is unwell." I didn't yell. I didn't interrupt. I just turned to the crowd, met the eyes of Mrs. Gable, the woman who had pitied me in the grocery store, and held her gaze until she looked away. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't need to see the fall. I had pushed the first domino. Gravity would do the rest. The applause in the ballroom of the Highland Club was polite, rhythmic, and suffocating. I sat at a table near the back, next to Elise and Victor, my hands folded in my lap to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. The lights were dimmed, focusing all attention on the dais where my parents stood, bathed in a golden spotlight that made them look like royalty. My father was at the podium, his tuxedo impeccable, his smile practiced. My mother stood beside him, clutching a bouquet of roses, looking up at him with a gaze of adoring devotion that I knew was as calculated as the seating chart. And there, stepping forward to join them, was Julian. "And finally," my father said, his voice booming with paternal pride, "we want to acknowledge the future, the next generation of leadership who will carry the Simmons legacy forward. Julian has been instrumental in our recent property acquisitions, and we are proud to have him represent our family's values." The room erupted in applause again. Julian beamed, shaking my father's hand, kissing my mother's cheek. It was the tableau they had paid for with my money, the son they wanted, funded by the daughter they hid. I felt the old, familiar urge to disappear. It was a reflex honed over 30 years of being the outsider, the instinct to slide into the shadows, to leave the room, to let them have their moment because fighting them felt like fighting gravity, but I didn't move. I felt the weight of the photocopy in my pocket, the jagged edge of the document where the seal had been cut. I felt the cold logic of the ledger entries Victor had memorized. I stayed seated. I planted my feet on the carpet and forced myself to breathe. "Now," Elise whispered, "the process server, a man named Mr. Graves who looked like a forgettable accountant, stood up from a table near the front. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked with a steady, purposeful gait toward the stage." My father was mid-sentence, transitioning to a joke about the club's golf tournament. He saw movement in his peripheral vision and paused, his smile faltering slightly. Mr. Graves reached the edge of the dais. He didn't climb the stairs. He reached up and placed a thick bound stack of documents on the velvet-covered table, right next to the floral arrangement. "Robert Simmons?" "Mr. Graves said. His voice wasn't amplified, but in the sudden hush of the room, it carried like a gunshot. "You are served. Emergency motion for removal of trustee and injunctive relief." My father stared at the papers. For a second, he looked like a man trying to read a map in a foreign language. Then, the comprehension hit him. He recoiled, taking a half step back, knocking into the microphone stand. A feedback squeal pierced the air. Whispers started, a low buzzing sound that spread outward from the front tables like a ripple in water. People were leaning in, pointing. The Community Leadership Award suddenly felt very heavy in my mother's hands. She looked at the papers, then out at the crowd, her eyes wide and terrified. On stage, the smiles froze. It was grotesque, like watching wax figures melt. My father tried to recover, reaching for the microphone, but his hand was shaking. We have a small administrative matter," he stammered. "If you will excuse us." Elise stood up. She didn't look at the stage. She looked directly at the man sitting at the table to our right. "Mr. Thorne, the General Counsel for the Highland Civic Foundation. Mr. Thorne," Elise said, her voice pitched perfectly to be heard by him and the 6 wealthy donors surrounding him. As counsel for the plaintiff, I am obligated to inform you that the court filing served tonight includes evidence of commingled funds between the Meridian Trust and this foundation. Mr. Thorne's head snapped up. Commingled? We have attached forensic accounting showing that foundation grants were used as pass-through payments to entities controlled by the treasurer, Elise said calmly. We are requesting a preservation order for all foundation records effective immediately. The color drained from Mr. Thorne's face. He wasn't thinking about my family drama. He was thinking about his law license and the foundation's tax-exempt status. He immediately pulled out his phone and stood up, signaling to the other board members. The ripple of whispers turned into a wave of confusion. The gala was dissolving. The illusion of the Simmons family as pillars of the community was cracking in real time, fractured by the dull reality of a court summons. My father came down the stairs of the stage, bypassing the well-wishers, moving straight toward me. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes dark and hard. Julian trailed behind him, looking like a child who had been promised ice cream and was handed a bill instead. My father stopped 2 feet from my table. He leaned in, his voice a low hiss that smelled of scotch and panic. You are humiliating yourself, he said. Do you have any idea what you have done? You are making a scene that you can never take back. I looked up at him. I didn't stand. I let him tower over me, because for the first time, his height didn't make me feel small. It made him look desperate. You humiliated me for 33 years, I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and absolutely clear. You told the world I was a charity case while you spent my inheritance on vacations. I'm not making a scene, Dad. I'm just submitting the paperwork. He flinched. The word Dad sounded like an accusation. He opened his mouth to speak, to threaten, to charm. But Mr. Thorne was suddenly there, gripping his elbow. Bob, we need to talk. Mr. Thorne said, his voice icy. In the office? Now. My father looked at me, then at the lawyer. He saw the shift in power. He saw that the club, the foundation, the social fortress he had built, it was all turning against him to save itself. He let himself be led away. My mother followed, her head down, refusing to look at me. Julian lingered for a second, staring at me with a mixture of confusion and resentment, before hurrying after them. I sat there for another minute, watching the room churn. I took a sip of water. It tasted clean. Let's go, I said to Elise. The order came down at 8 o'clock that evening. We were back at Elise's office, eating takeout Thai food in the conference room, when her computer pinged. She opened the email, scanned the document, and let out a long, slow breath. It is granted, she said. She turned the screen toward me. Order for temporary restraining order and appointment of interim trustee. The judge had frozen everything. The trust accounts, the shell companies, the personal accounts that had received transfers from the trust, all of it was locked. My father couldn't buy a stick of gum with that money, let alone pay a lawyer. But the most important line was at the bottom. The court hereby removes Robert Simmons as trustee, effective immediately. Citing a prima facie showing of breach of fiduciary duty and self-dealing, the court appoints Andrew Gentry, Esquire, as temporary independent trustee to take possession of all trust assets and records. He's out, Victor said, popping a spring roll into his mouth. He is officially fired from his own family. The next 3 days were a blur of bureaucratic victory. Mr. Gentry, the independent trustee, was a man who acted with the speed and emotionlessness of a finely tuned machine. He seized the records from my father's home office, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy. He interviewed the bank officers. He reviewed the educational reimbursement checks. On Friday morning, I received his preliminary report. I sat in my apartment, the physical copy of the report heavy in my hands. I turned to the summary page. Based on a review of the original trust instrument and the financial activity of the last 2 decades, it is the opinion of the trustee that Madeline Simmons is the sole intended beneficiary of the Meridian Trust. The pattern of disbursements labeled advances appears wholly inconsistent with the fiduciary duty owed to the beneficiary. Furthermore, the trustee has identified no evidence that the beneficiary was unreachable or incapacitated, as previously claimed by the former trustee. I read the sentence 3 times. Madeline Simmons is the sole intended beneficiary. It was the first time in my life that an authority figure, someone with no skin in the game, no reason to lie, had looked at the facts and said, "You are real. You matter. This belongs to you." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't an apology. But it was validation. It was the legal acknowledgement that my reality was true and their narrative was false. I put the report down and walked to the window. The city looked different. It looked accessible. I wasn't the girl looking in anymore. I was holding the keys. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Elise would have called. Victor would have texted. I looked through the peephole. It was my mother. She was alone. She was wearing a trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, and no makeup. I had never seen her without makeup outside the house. She looked smaller, older, her face lined with a sudden, haggard exhaustion. I opened the door. She didn't push past me. She stood in the hallway, clutching her purse. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. I stepped aside. She walked into my living room and looked around. It was a modest apartment, filled with secondhand furniture and books. She had always criticized it, calling it bohemian. Now, she looked at it as if it were a courtroom. "They froze the accounts," she said, not looking at me. "All of them, even the joint checking. I couldn't buy groceries today." I didn't say anything. I knew she had credit cards in her own name that weren't touched. She wasn't starving. She was inconvenienced. But to her, the loss of liquidity was a physical wound. "Why are you here?" I asked. She turned to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "We never meant to hurt you." "Madeline," I laughed. It was a short, humorless sound. "You stole $3 million from me. You gaslit me into thinking I was crazy. You told the world I wasn't your real daughter. How is that not meaning to hurt me?" "We were scared," she cried, her voice rising. Eleanor Vance. She was a fanatic. She wanted to give a child with bad blood, access to millions of dollars. We knew what would happen. You would have been targeted. You would have been ruined. "So you ruined me first?" I asked. "To save me the trouble?" "We saved you," she hissed. Stepping forward, the intensity in her eyes was terrifying. "We took you in. We gave you a name. We gave you a home. Do you have any idea what would have happened to you if we hadn't? You would have been in the system. You would have been nothing." I stared at her. She believed it. That was the horror of it. She truly believed that because they had provided food and shelter. They owned me. She believed that saving me gave them the right to consume me. "You didn't save me," I said quietly. "You invested in me. And when the return on investment came in the form of a trust fund, you decided to cash out." She crumbled. The anger vanished, replaced by a hollow, weeping desperation. She sank onto my sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Maddie," she sobbed. "Your father. He could go to jail. The tax fraud charges. Mr. Thorne says the DA is looking at the foundation. Please, you have the power to stop this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we had an arrangement." I looked at the woman who had raised me. I saw the gray in her hair. I saw the trembling of her shoulders. I felt a surge of pity. It was agonizing. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to fix it. That programming was deep, carved into my bones over 30 years. But then I remembered the cut corner of the document. I remembered the text message. "You are not who you think you are. I am not the judge." "Mother," I said, "I am just the witness." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "You are cruel," she whispered, "just like your father." "My biological father?" I asked. "Or the one who stole my money?" She flinched. I walked to the door and opened it. "You need to leave," I said. She stood up slowly. She gathered her coat around her like a shield. She walked to the door, pausing on the threshold. She looked at me one last time. there was no love in her eyes anymore. Only fear and a strange, distant recognition. "You won," she said. "I hope it's worth it." She walked down the hall, her footsteps fading into silence. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned my back against the wood and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. I didn't cry. I felt empty, scoured clean. I had won. Mr. Gentry would recover the assets. The house would probably be sold to pay back the trust. My parents would face criminal charges. I would have the money Eleanor Vance had meant for me. I pulled the photocopy of the identity certificate out of my pocket. I looked at the name, Madeline Simmons. I still didn't have the original. My father had destroyed it. I would get the money because the court had intervened. But the final piece of proof, the tangible, original link to the woman who had loved me, was gone forever. And there was something else. In the bottom margin of the photocopy, barely visible, was a handwritten note in ink that had faded in the copy process. I had noticed it earlier, but hadn't focused on it until now. It was a date, August 12th, 1990. My birthday was June 12th, 1990. Why was the date different? I stared at it. August 12th. Was it the date the document was signed? Or was it something else? My mother's words echoed in my head. "You are not who you think you are," and Eleanor Vance's letter. "The world can be a hard place. I have built a nest for you." I realized then that the trust wasn't the end of the mystery. It was just the beginning. The money was the key to the door. But I hadn't stepped through it yet. I stood up. I walked to my desk and put the photocopy in a fresh file folder. I labeled it Part 1. I had clarity. I had leverage. I had the means to survive. But as I looked out at the lights of the city, I knew that the story wasn't over. I had dismantled the lie of my family, but I still had to find the truth of myself. I picked up my phone and texted Elise. "It's done." She left. "What's next?" Elise replied, a moment later. "Next, we find the rest of the paper trail. Rest tonight. Madeline, you earned it." I put the phone down. I was alone. I was rich. I was vindicated. And for the first time in 33 years, I was real. Thank you so much for listening to My Parents Told Me I Wasn't Real Family until a 25-year-old trust proved who the real heir was. I hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and unraveling deception. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to fight for your own truth, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of betrayal, retribution, and the long road to justice. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, stay strong and keep your receipts.